Thank you, Mr. President. Just want the opportunity to explain myself. Probably don't have enough time to do that, but I rise to tell you, first of all, I will be voting in favor of Senate Resolution 1. I cast my no vote on December the 29th and was in a distinct minority. 11 days from today, we will be swearing in, I think maybe for the first time in American history, a president with no prior government service or experience. And I would submit to you the reason for that has to do with things like what we're debating today. I do want to talk about what I think are the good parts of this process and this resolution. I think the moving up of crossover day is a welcome change and will help our process. I'm very appreciative of the Rules Chairman having an open and public process and an opportunity for all of us who had concerns to bring those forward and have an open discussion and debate. But I do want to talk about what I think are the problematic points and the reason that I did cast a no vote on December the 29th. First of all, the period of time we have to review legislation. I've gotten to a point where it's very rare on day 39 or day 40 that I vote yes. And it's not because all the legislation is necessarily objectionable, it's because I don't know what I'm voting on. And I think that it's common sense to say, whatever the period you think it might be, maybe it's 24 hours, maybe it's less than that, for us to have the time to understand what it is we're voting on, and frankly, for the people that we represent to have the time to react and respond. And for a moment, just to talk specifically about conference committee reports, these are not academic questions. These are not things that have never happened that are just abstract objections. When we considered House Bill 170 in 2015, the conference committee report contained a $5 per night tax on hotel rooms. And forget about the policy. Forget about whether or not you think that's good or bad policy. For that to be placed on members' desks at 9:30 in the evening on day 39 and for us to then vote at 11:45 in the evening is wrong. We should not be put in that position as members. I had constituents in the hospitality industry that wanted to be heard. They couldn't be heard because they didn't even know what had happened until the bill had already been passed and sent to the governor. But that's also true for bills that are on final passage or special orders. We had a bill reforming Georgia's watchdog agency for judicial ethics, the Judicial Qualifications Commission. It was House Bill 808. I came down to this, it was well after midnight, to speak to it and to speak to the issues with it. Now we have a situation where the old JQC has been abolished. We're going to have a new JQC for 6 months. And then after June 30th, there's a third JQC that comes into play. That's because of poorly drafted legislation that we didn't have an opportunity to vet or understand. Restricting points of personal privilege. You know, I'm not afraid of what the senator from the 39th or the senator from the 41st or anybody else has to say. I think this is a deliberative body, and deliberative bodies debate. They have discussion. They have dialogue. Frankly, I think that having more time for points of personal privilege would make sense, and restricting it, I think, is certainly a step in the wrong direction. On conference committees also, during the interim, during the summer, I was flipping around on TV and actually saw a congressional conference committee on C-SPAN, and I was probably the only one watching, but they had televised, the conference committee meeting, and there was actual dialogue and discussion and debate, and you got to see that process all the way through to the end. We don't have that opportunity here. The public is not available to see what happens in a conference committee process, and that ought to be changed. That ought to be changed for our other committees as well. The people we represent ought to be, they shouldn't have to drive to the Capitol to see what our business is and what business we're doing. There ought to be additional opportunities for the public to interact with the General Assembly through electronic means. I think the other thing that these rules do and that needs to be drawn attention to is that the 2-hour rule that was referenced earlier in debate, we are now putting a sort of caveat on that it can be suspended by a majority. So it's actually a huge step backward. Even a 1-hour rule that required 2/3 of the chamber to vote to suspend it is better than a 2-hour rule that can be immediately suspended with just 29 people voting on it. So we've essentially installed a rule change now that allows us to go to immediate votes on conference committee reports like we already can do on special orders. Floor amendments by recorded vote. We were going to have the vote on engrossment today, I guess by a hand count, and then the senator from the 39th raised an objection and wanted it recorded. Now, this will probably be the only time in our 80 days over the next 2 years that led immediately to a recorded vote. One senator demanding a recorded vote gets a recorded vote. Under these rules, you've got to have 5 members ask for a recorded vote. Any one of us that sits here representing 175,000 people ought to be given the dignity of demanding a recorded vote on a floor amendment. The other issue that I would mention is when we adjourn on the 40th day of the legislative session. When I first got elected, we adjourned at midnight. That was just sort of understood. We were going to adjourn at midnight. I think the last 3 years, it's been later and later, but it's definitely been after midnight every time. We've definitely been passing multiple bills every time. And for those of you who have been down here for that, it's just not the way you would want to conduct your business. Nominations and the confirmation process. For us to hold a vote, I would rather us bring forward a constitutional amendment getting rid of the Senate's confirmation authority than continuing to exercise it in the manner that we have over the last several years, where we cast one vote on over 1,000 names. There's very little time to review. There's no committee process. There's no vetting. We're just given a list and basically told, vote yes or no. I do again appreciate the opportunity to come down here and explain the issues I have. The rules that we are going to pass do have an amendment process, and I think all of those of us who have concerns ought to look at that and potentially take advantage of that process to continue to raise these issues. Because, we know what the vote's going to be today. I'm not going to take up a whole bunch of your time, but what I am going to say is this discussion needs to continue because for those of us, particularly in the majority party, we should be at the leading edge of making our government accessible, open, and transparent, and we can and should do better. Thank you, Mr. President. I'll yield if there are any questions. If not, I'll yield the will.
There is a question. Chair recognizes Senator in the 41st, the Minority Leader.
Will the Senator yield?
Yes, sir.
Senator, is it not true that when we started this process of the committee, the chairman asked members of the Senate and sent to all members a request for recommended changes, of which you followed through and made some recommendations of your own for changes? Was that not? And he set a deadline for us to do that?
That is true.
And at that first meeting, is it not true that myself, who had some like ending at midnight or proportional representation on committees, made our case, and you were there with a couple of yours and made your case? Is that not true?
That is true.
Is it not further true that the rule to change our points of personal privilege from 5 to 3 minutes was something that was not written by an individual senator or proposed early in a timely manner as you and I did with our recommendations, but it was something the chairman brought to the last committee meeting, and only that last committee meeting were we able to debate and discuss that, shortening our personal privilege points?
It wasn't discussed at the meeting I attended. Beyond that, I don't have any personal knowledge.
No further questions, Senator.
Thank you.
Does any